Welcome to the second episode of the MMA Lotcast this week as we cover PFL 7, which is the opening round of the playoffs for the heavyweights and women's flyweights. Not to mention we got 6 other fights to close out the rest of the card, but solid offering from the PFL here. Obviously, a lot of chalky favorites, so we'll have to weed our way through and see which underdogs could potentially pull off the upset. But for the most part, I'm expecting another chalk-heavy card to come through as PFL and Bellator is normally known for. Just a quick plug for the MMA Fight Archive. If you want to know how I found out so much about these fighters that I'm about to break down for you guys in brief fashion, as I normally do for these PFL and Bellator events, you guys can check out the MMA Fight Archive. We got over 4,000 fighter profiles available for you guys to research from and to ensure you leave no stone unturned, as we have direct links to past fights for pretty much all of these fighters, and we cover 17 different promotions from all over the world. Just in August alone, we have Contender series kicking off in a few weeks. I believe next week or the week after that. We got LFA, Fury FC, Brave CF, Invicta FC, ACA, CFFC, Road to UFC is about to kick off as well. KSW to close out the month as well. So a ton of great promotions on there for you to research from, whether you're looking to bet on these fights or just break them down, predicting if you're a coach, if you're a fighter. This is a great resource as well to sharpen up on who your opponent is or what you can use to take advantage of your opponents to ensure that you're able to get the victory or correctly predict a fight. There is a 7-day free trial for you to check it out for free. Check the link in the description below. Once again, that is the MMA Fight Archive. Check out while we're closing in on 90 plus subscribers now and who are all taking full advantage of this great service. All right. Like I said, we got PFL 7 going down this weekend. I believe the main event is Dennis Goltsov going up against Tim Johnson. Winner there goes on to the finals to fight the winner of Oleg Popov and I believe it is, Linton Vassell. And then for the women's, we got Dakota Ditcheva going up against Jenna Bishop. Winner of that will end up fighting Tyler Santos versus Liz Carmouche. But we got a bunch of other fights to talk about first. So, like I said, I'm going to go through this in a brief breakdown format, not as in-depth as my UFC breakdowns normally are. So, let's get right into it. First fight of the night, Kevin Pease coming in at minus 350, going up against Meck, who comes in at plus 275. Both of these guys making their PFL debuts here, but I believe Pease is the one with a far higher ceiling and much more potential. This kid is 5-0, trains out of Killcliff FC, and utilizes a grapple-heavy approach in most of his fights, utilizing his BJJ brown belt, keeping his opponents in uncomfortable positions and either finishing them or going to a decision. He has defeated opponents in the first round, second round, third round, and won by decision, showcasing that he has a good enough gas tank to go a hard 15 if that's what's required of him. Meck, on the other hand, is 7-1 with his lone professional defeat coming against a regional veteran in JP St. Louis in a matchup where we saw Meck lean on his wrestle-heavy approach, but unfortunately was unable to dish out enough damage, and ultimately St. Louis is able to defend and damage at the same time and end up getting his hand raised on the scorecards. We'll see, obviously, Meck looking to get for his takedowns going here, but Pease is far superior in that realm, doing all the little things right, making sure his opponents don't initiate the hooks when they're trying to take his back, utilizing proper wrist control to assert his dominant top position, great head movement and head placement in those clinch positions, and training out of Killcliff FC, he's training with a room full of killers. I believe he is worth the chalky price that he's currently at minus 350. I think he goes out there, defends properly against Meck early, and then really starts to take over this fight in deeper waters. But I expect this fight to go to the scorecards, and I think Pease ends up getting his hand raised there. Next up, Willis coming in at minus 150, going up against Anthony Ivy, who comes in at plus 130. Obviously, Willis, really rough run as of late, 1-4 over his last 5 fights on a 2-fight losing streak, most recently to Cedric Doumbé in a fight where he had a little bit of success, but ultimately getting finished by ground and pound and just a barrage of shots. The fight prior to that, he gets finished by current champion Ramazan Kuramagomedov, so tough to really make it too bad for Willis there. But Willis is a guy that came into Bellator as the LFA champion, showcased a solid all-around skill set, good grappling, good striking, good speed, decent power, but he seems to be coming up short against guys that are specialists in certain areas. Obviously, Crutchmer was unable to get him to the ground and grind him out long enough to win that fight, and that just showcased that Willis can be competitive and very difficult to deal with. But he's also a guy that can get smushed pretty early, as all 4 of his losses during this current run have come in the first round. Anthony Ivy is a guy that's battled back from some very bad adversity. He came into the UFC with an 8-2 record while riding a 5-fight winning streak, but unfortunately for him, he ended up going on a 5-fight losing streak and now has managed to finally bounce back and get into a 6-fight winning streak. So it's really hot or cold for this guy, and he's really hot right now. He is a BJJ black belt that does a great job in terms of taking the back of his opponents and looking to strangle these guys with rear naked chokes. His striking is slowly coming together a lot more than it was in the UFC, which allows him to mask his takedowns a little bit easier so that he can implement his BJJ heavy approach, which is what usually allows him to be successful in his fights. In this matchup, I think it'll be initially hard for him to initiate that against Willis, but I think at a certain point, he's going to be able to break that defense of Willis and eventually get his grappling going here. I was really high on Willis in the past. I've tried to back him at big dog odds in the past, and it's really not worked out for me. And I feel like I got to flip the script here and actually go on that Ivy side, who's shown massive improvements in his confidence and his striking as of late, which I think will allow him to initiate the grappling here and eventually strangle Jaleel Willis. So I'm going to go with Ivy. I don't mind the fight doesn't go to decision as well, which is currently at -160, but I think that it'll eventually be Ivy who ends up getting this fight to the ground and finding a submission. All right, next up, Sergio Cossio coming in at -250, going up against PFL newcomer Dedrick Sanders, who comes in at +210. Now, Sergio Cossio just over a month ago went out there and defeated Anthony Romero in a matchup where he utilized his aggressive striking approach to keep the pressure on Romero, hurting him numerous times and eventually winning that fight on the scorecards. We saw Cossio in the fight before that in Bellator go up against Jesse Roberts, and it seemed like he was staring down the barrel of a unanimous decision loss, but he did a great job in terms of keeping the pressure and utilizing a lot of scrambles to eventually set up that submission that he was able to submit his opponent in the 3rd round and keep this winning streak on that he has. This guy has a wealth of experience coming into his 38th professional fight, loves to be aggressive, loves to push the pressure and keep the pace up, and I think that could eventually lead him to victory here against Dedrick Sanders. Sanders had I believe, 5-fight winning streak going into his last fight against Luis Pena on the regional scene, former UFC fighter, and he ended up getting outstruck in that matchup as Pena did a great job in terms of keeping him at distance and picking him apart. This will be a different approach from Cossio, who I think will be initiating in the pocket a little bit more, and Sanders is just as live to land a big shot here against Cossio, so I'm not overly hyped on that -250 line that Cossio currently finds himself at, but I think given the experience and given the overall advantage that Cossio should have in this spot, he should go out there and end up finishing Sanders maybe in the 2nd or 3rd round as his pace and pressure starts to catch up to Sanders. Next up, Cody Law, -900, going up against PFL Challenger Series alum Zachary Hicks, coming in at +600. Now, Cody Law went 0-2 in 2022, but managed to rally back to 2-0 in 2023, doing a good job in terms of learning from his mistakes in past fights and really trying to round out his skill set. His striking is very much coming together, and I love his commitment to that calf kick, which opens up the rest of his game, just as he showed in his last matchup against Jefferson Pontes. He actually struck for the 1st and 3rd rounds where he had major success, and then in the 2nd round he leaned on his wrestling, which allowed him to really mix it up on his opponent and keep his opponent guessing in terms of what's coming back his way. If he sticks to the calf kick, sticks to throwing some combinations and eventually mixing some takedowns behind it, this guy will achieve the potential that a lot of people expected of him when he came into the MMA scene to begin with. But he's going to have to go up against a regional veteran here in Zachary Hicks, who's coming off of a unanimous decision victory last time around as he grinded his opponent out over 15 minutes and got his hand raised on the scorecards. Prior to that, he was on the PFL Challenger Series where he came in as a big underdog against Nathan Kelly and got immediately taken down and immediately submitted. So there's nothing in this fight that gives me pause and to think that Cody Law will fumble the bag. I think Law will strike with him for a little bit, but eventually take this fight to the ground and I think he can eventually find a finish as well. But at times you see Law a little bit more happy to just get that experience and cage time under his belt. So I'm not totally locking in the inside the distance spot here, but I do think that Law wins this fight any which way that he wants. Next up, we got Alexei Pergande coming in at -2,000, going up against Daniel Boehle, who comes in at +1,000. There's really no need to really break this fight down. Pergande is the superior fighter pretty much everywhere. Boehle has a little bit of jiu-jitsu and submissions up his sleeve, but Pergande is very well-rounded for a guy that's only 4-0 in his career, training with the Killcliff FC guys as well. I expect him to go out there and find a finish within the first 2 rounds over Boehle. Next up, Tyrell Fortune coming in at +145, going up against Sergey Bilostenniy, who comes in at -170. Now, this is a rematch of a matchup where Tyrell Fortune had some solid success with his grappling early, and then when he started going for a mat return with his second takedown attempt, Bilostenniy was going to work on the back of the head of Tyrell Fortune, as I feel like every single shot that he was landing was to the back of the head of Fortune, and then one eventually dropped Fortune, and that's where we got the stoppage and the eventual DQ of Bilostenniy, giving the victory to Tyrell Fortune. Now, the interesting aspect of this fight is the fact that Fortune came in as a -135 favorite into their first matchup, but now finds himself at +145. Now, Fortune, since that original matchup, has gone out there and defeated Marcelo Gome on the scorecards, whereas Bilostenniy has gone 2-0, defeating Karim Aras by, I believe it was a spinning back kick, and then eventually going out there and beating Blagoy Ivanov earlier this year by taking him to a decision, utilizing his youth, speed, and power. And we know that it's hard to put Ivanov away, so it's great to see Bilostenniy able to keep that up over the course of 15 minutes to win that matchup. But it still leaves a lot to be desired in terms of Bilostenniy's defensive grappling. Yes, he was eventually able to work back to his feet against Fortune and get off on his striking, but eventually lead to that DQ. But he was still spending a decent amount of time on his back, and I think Fortune can rinse and repeat that style to really put Bilostenniy through it. Before Bilostenniy came to Bellator, that was kind of the issue in his game, was his takedown defense and his inability to work back to his feet. Luckily for him, he was going up against lower level competition, so you could come back and eventually finish them or still defeat them. But I think Tyrell Fortune still has good enough wrestling and a good enough gas tank to really put it on Bilostenniy here in the grappling realm, grind this fight out, and cash as a +145 favorite. So I love him as an underdog here, and as long as his durability holds up, just as we've seen in prior fights, hopefully he can do that here against Bilostenniy and grind this fight out. Next up, Tyler Santos coming in at -330, going up against Liz Carmouche, who comes in at +270 in the first of our 2 flyweight opening round playoff matchups. Tyler Santos obviously coming off that victory over Jenna Bishop last time around in a hard-fought fight where Bishop was trying to get the takedown, but Santos's physicality and strength came into play as she was the one able to get the takedowns, land some good shots from the top position, and even in the striking realm, utilize her heavy leg kicks to really hurt Bishop and keep Bishop away from what she is best at, and that was utilizing her BJJ approach. Santos, a lot of people thought as soon as she got signed to the PFL that she would be the overwhelming favorite to go out there and win the $1 million paycheck. But when you got Dakota Ditcheva on the other side of the bracket staring at you, you got to wonder who ends up coming out on top. But in this matchup specifically, she's going up against former Bellator champion Liz Carmouche, who has yet to taste defeat ever since she joined or left the UFC. She's rattled off, I don't know how many wins in a row as of right now, continuously winning the title in Bellator, defending it a couple times. But there were a couple fights, 2 out of her last 4 fights, where it seemed like she was going to lose the fight on the scorecards, but managed to pull off submissions in crunch time and get the tap from her opponents. Most recently from Yuta Watanabe. No, I think that's a fashion designer, if I'm not mistaken, Kana Watanabe, who was grinding her out over the course of the first 2 rounds with her wrestle-heavy approach. And Carmouche, she showcases flimsy takedown defense at times, but she stays active enough off her back to throw up submissions and try to catch her opponents, and it's worked out for her against Deanna Bennett, and then most recently against Kana Watanabe. I think Santos is the better striker here, and I think Santos's physicality will end up being the difference maker. But given how live Carmouche always finds herself, and given where her confidence is probably at, it's hard to muster up the confidence to really take Taila Santos at minus 330 to win this matchup. I expect it to go the distance. Maybe Santos by decision would be a good way to play it, although that's probably at a chalky price. I still think Santos wins this fight. I'd be surprised if she gets caught in anything here by Carmouche, and I expect Santos to grind this fight out and advance to the finals of the flyweight tournament. Next up, Oleg Popov coming in at minus 240, going up against Linton Vassell, who comes in at plus 205. Both these guys vying to get to the finals of the PFL 2024 heavyweight tournament, and this is a solid matchup. Now, Popov is on a 16-fight winning streak. Absolutely absurd to have that type of winning streak in the heavyweight division. But this guy puts a grind on his opponents and is often able to break them, eventually finishing them. Last time around, he had a little bit of trouble in terms of finishing Davion Franklin, but did a great job in terms of staying away from the power striking approach, eventually grinding him out, grounding him when he needs to. And even though Franklin utilized the Derek Lewis type approach in terms of working back to his feet, we saw Popov continuously mat return him and keep him on his back and really wear on that gas tank. That's Popov at his best, grinding opponents, sucking them of their energy, and just chipping away at them until he can eventually finish them. Vassell, on the other hand, was a lock of the night play for me against Denis Goltsov in his opening regular season bout, and I really thought that was a fight that he could utilize what he did in the first round, grapple heavily, keep Goltsov on the defensive, and maybe even find a big punch to put Goltsov away, but he death-gassed horribly trying to hold Goltsov down, and then in the second and third rounds, it looked like a shell of himself, allowing Goltsov to pound him out in the third round. Then he comes back against Valentin Moldavsky, has a poor first round, wins the second round, and then in the third round, it hits a crucial reversal, which allows him to get off enough damage that two judges actually scored it in his favor. I thought Moldavsky won the fight, but Vassell showed he still had enough fight in that third round to sway judges in his favor. Vassell is a grapple-heavy fighter, but has some power punches, but I do not think he is at the level to achieve this PFL title. He goes up against a guy in Popov who's going to be very difficult to try to reverse later on in fights. Moldavsky has been flaky, as we've seen in past fights, even against guys like Ryan Bader, but Popov puts on a pressure and a pace that not a lot of guys can keep up with just because he just keeps that same pace from minute 1 to minute 15. I expect this to be close early, but if Popov can avoid the big power of Vassell, keep him on his back or keep him up against the cage and drain him of his energy, he should start to cruise in the second and third rounds, and I think that will eventually lead to him finishing Vassell in the second or third round. Co-main event time here as we have Dakota Ditcheva coming in at minus 430, going up against Jenna Bishop, who comes in at plus 330. Now, Ditcheva is probably the PFL's cash cow at this point in time in terms of the way that they're building her up and finally getting her on the main roster this year. She's showing up and showing out by finishing all of her opponents. She does a great job in terms of stopping the takedowns that are inevitably coming her way because of the striking background that she brings to the table, and seeing the way that she dispatched of Chelsea Hackett last time around should give her even more confidence. It seemed like she was in control the entire time. It's really her takedown defense which allows her to be this effective in the striking round, because she just throws with such ferocity, power, that not a lot of women at this weight class can put together themselves. As long as Ditcheva can keep fights in the striking realm, she's going to be a menace to deal with. Now, she's going up with Jenna Bishop, who's a high-level BJJ black belt, but unfortunately for her, came into the game a little bit too late. She's 38 years old and was 7-0 until she ended up facing her first loss last time around against Taila Santos, which shows that she can really wipe the floor with some of these lower-level women, but when she fights girls that can keep fights in the upright position, she'll usually be on the back end here, and that's what I think ends up happening here. I think Ditcheva will do a great job in terms of stopping the advances of Bishop, really touching her up on the feet, and then eventually finishing her by knockout. There was a time where I really questioned Ditcheva's ability to stop takedowns, but seeing what I've been seeing and seeing the lack of takedown approach from Bishop here in terms of the wrestling that she brings to the table, I think that we'll see Ditcheva really keep this fight in the standing position and eventually find that knockout, probably in the first or second round. All right, main event slot here between Denis Goltsov coming in at -600, going up against Tim Johnson, who comes in at +425. Now, Denis Goltsov is probably the best fighter on the PFL roster who has yet to win a PFL championship. He always finds himself this close. Specifically last year, where he had a very solid first round against Renan Ferreira and then got knocked out in the opening 30 seconds of the second round. This guy's always just right there, but ends up coming up short. He's lost to guys like Ante Delia. He's lost to Ali Isaev. And then obviously the last season to Renan Ferreira. But this guy has showcased over and over again that he is one of the best heavyweights on that roster and probably one of the better heavyweights in the world. Solid striking. Obviously, chin needs to be a little bit of a worry. Great wrestling, great grind, great ability to battle back from adversity and put guys through the grind and end up still getting his hand raised, just as we saw against Vassell earlier this year. And I think he's just destined to become PFL heavyweight champion. He's going up against Tim Johnson, who was actually a lock of the night play for me last time around, as he took probably one of the worst groin kicks we've ever seen and still managed to come back and knock out Danilo Marquez. But he did get hurt to the body as well before that, a shot to the groin. Luckily, he battles through it and ends up getting the knockout here. Johnson knows he's on the back nine of his career, right? This guy drives truck full time, if I'm not mistaken. I'm sure he's taking a little bit of time off for that so that he can try to achieve this $1 million prize paycheck from the PFL if he's able to get through the tournament. But I think he's really up against it here against Goltsov. Unless he knocks out Goltsov early, I really think Goltsov does a great job in terms of keeping the pressure on him, utilizing his striking advantage, maybe even mixing in wrestling of his own. But I think we see Goltsov wear on Johnson and eventually finish him in the second or third round. There you guys go. PFL 7 breakdown. I believe PFL 8 is not until, it's not next week. Usually PFL does back-to-back-to-back weeks with their cards, but PFL 7 August 2nd this weekend, and then PFL 8 is not until August 16th, so I'll be back that week for another PFL breakdown for you guys. A reminder, there's also LFA going down Friday night, which I'll have written breakdowns for on the Lock of the Night Patreon page. Otherwise, I will see you guys tomorrow for the UFC Abu Dhabi quick picks segment that I dropped for you guys. I'll see you guys then. Peace.